Welcome colleagues and any members of the public who may be watching us to the meeting today of the Community Environment Highways Select Committee, and our principal, indeed probably only item of the agenda is an important one to discuss the budget. Now I've got the usual mantra to read, so apologies for that. This is a remote meeting being streamed on the Council's website as per the regulations during the COVID-19 pandemic. I will be taking a roll call at the beginning of the meeting to confirm attendance before we begin the agenda. Maybe Ross could do, or Barney could do that rather than me. All cameras and microphones other than mine should be switched off unless you're asking or answering a question. If you wish to ask a question, please can you use the raise your hand icon if that doesn't exist on your device. Indicate in the chat box that you would like to speak. This will be acknowledged by Democratic Services via a thumbs up icon. Use the chat function only to indicate you wish to speak, not to post questions or comments, as this is not visible to the public. Finally, given the circumstances, final wording of recommendations may be agreed via email after the meeting is closed. These will, of course, be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Before we go on, do we want to do this? Are we obliged to do this roll call? But if we are, let's do it. Can Ross?
Yeah, I can quickly run through it, and if just people just say that they're here. It's the best way for us to be able to record attendance. So I'll start. Mr. John O'Reilly.
Here.
Mr. Andy McLeod.
Here.
Mr. Sash Hussain.
Here. Yes.
Mrs. Fiona White.
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Keith Whitlam.
Yes, delighted to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Mike Benison. Mike.
Hello. Hi. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. Mrs. John Mason. Is John on the call? Okay. Ken Gladdy.
Yes, I'm here.
John Fury. Not hearing John. Paul Deitch.
Good morning.
Morning. Jonathan Essex.
Hi, good morning.
And Mike Goodman.
Yes, good morning to you all.
Excellent. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're all here -2, Jan and John. Okay, so for apologies and absence, we've done minutes of the previous meeting. To approve the minutes, they agreed, thank you. Declarations of interest, no, none, that's excellent. 4 questions, there have been none. So that concludes the other stuff. So we now move on to the main item, which is scrutiny of the 21-22 draft budget and medium-term financial strategy to 2025-26. Colleagues, at the pre-meeting, and I hope at the full meeting we'll agree the process by which this will, the procedure by which we'll take this item. And the first is that we'll have a short presentation from either Tony or Mark, if they're both here, or a replacement, if you like, on the macro budget picture. Hi, Mark. And any questions that colleagues will have on the overall picture for the council. And then we'll have the Katie and Matt, Natalie, or Denise, Natalie, to talk about the ETI for maybe 5-10 minutes to give an introduction, and then we'll do the same process of questions, comments to the ETI team, and then when we've concluded that, we'll do the same for the CPG, for Denise and for Steve. So assuming that's okay, we've got 2 hours. Let's not exhaust ourselves necessarily on the macro, because we want to really get into detail for the 2 areas of service that this committee covers. So assuming that's okay with everybody, and do shout if you're not comfortable with that, but assuming nobody has shouted, let's go for that. So let's start off with Mark to talk about and Rachel to talk about the sort of overall picture of the council, and we'll take questions after that. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to share the slides, so if you can bear with me.
Well, before that, Mike, that's great. Thanks.
Sorry, did you want to say something, Chairman?
Video off, Mike. Goodman. Thanks. Over to you guys.
Morning, Chairman. So I'm Mark Hexanders. I'm the Strategic Finance Business Partner for Corporate Finance. And as you say, we'd start the session today by looking at the overall picture for Surrey County Council and the process that we followed to get to the draft budget for 21-22 and the medium-term financial strategy. So, Rachel, if you could move to the first slide, please. So the purpose of today's session and this slide deck in particular is to set out to the committee the 21-22 draft budget and medium-term financial strategy, focusing particularly on the budget for 21-22 and the budget gap that we presented in the draft budget report, and looking at the Council's position for 21-22 to 25-26. And as you say, once I've finished the corporate position, I can pick up any questions at that point, and then we'll move on to the detailed directorate positions.
Sure.
So in terms of progress to date, the immediate priority for 2021 really was to stabilise the county's finances following the COVID-19 crisis, and there have been a number of budget resets using the emergency government funding to achieve that. So having achieved a relatively stable position for 2021, we've moved attention to 21-22, and we began that with colleagues from across the council, across strategic and integrated planning and obviously the directorate leadership teams. And we began by establishing a set of core planning assumptions. And these are the assumptions and the scenarios that we use to plan the budget for 21-22 and the medium term. And we developed the assumptions around the well-established PESL framework, and PESL takes into account political, economical, social, technological, legislative and environmental and climate factors. So we used those factors to build up a scenario of what we thought the council's operating environment would be for 21-22 and the medium term, to quantify pressures and efficiencies and to identify a potential funding gap for the current financial year. So that culminated in a draft budget which we presented to Cabinet on the 24th of November that identified a gap to close. So that's the difference between the council's projected funding and the directorate spending requirements of 18.3 million. And from that point, the next steps are primarily to close the gap. We have a statutory responsibility to set a balanced budget in February of each financial year. And so closing the gap has been the key piece of work since then. And when we move on to the gap, I'll provide the committee with a brief update on where we are with that. And so as part of that, we've been refining the assumptions and finalising the efficiency and transformation proposals. Alongside that, we've been working on the 21-26 capital programme, and Tony or Rachel will provide details on how that looks for the ETI and CPG directorates. We're running a consultation with residents on the draft budget proposals and developing a quality impact assessment, and that will culminate in the final budget to Cabinet in January and then to full council for approval in February 21. So, Rachel, next slide, please. So just for some context, and I won't dwell on this slide, as I said, the budget has been developed in an integrated way across the organisation, and it's really been framed around the Council's community vision for 2030 and the new 4 priority objectives that were agreed by Cabinet in the reset paper in September. So the budget is framed around growing a sustainable economy, tackling health inequality, enabling a greener future and empowering communities. Thanks, Rachel. So in terms of the draft budget for 21-22, as I said, overall, when we presented the draft, there was an £18.3 million gap. So funding fell 18.3 million short of where we'd need to be to set a balanced budget. Since then, the government has issued what's known as the spending review, which sets out likely funding for the local authority sector as a whole. And we await the detailed local government settlement, which should be with us on Thursday or Friday this week, in theory, although the deadline keeps moving. And so, although we don't have the detailed position for Surrey at the moment, the spending review does give us relative confidence that we will be able to close the £18.3 million gap without recourse to further efficiency requirements from directorates. So what that means for ETI and community protection in theory is that the £5.9 million gap that you can see in the table there for ETI and the £1.2 million gap for community protection, if everything pans out as we expect, would be closed without requiring either directorate or service to provide more efficiency savings. Thanks, Rachel. So just finally looking at the medium-term financial plan, if we're uncertain of the 21-22 funding, we're even more uncertain of the medium-term estimates. But we've built them around an assumption that the government's fair funding review, which is a review of the distribution of central government resources across local government, will kick in from 22-23 and will have an overall negative effect on our funding. So over the medium term, we've drafted estimates of likely funding to provide the council and directorates with a likely direction of travel, which obviously we'll review as we go through the medium term. So next slide, please, Rachel. So to provide some context on how that's looking, we've estimated the funding gap over a 5-year period to 25-26 to rise to 170 million. So that 170 million gap consists of a reduction in funding of approximately 40 million. And as I say, that's through the fair funding review where we expect central support to reduce gradually and offset by increased growth pressures, so inflation, demand growth of up to 244 million, and we've identified efficiencies so far to offset that of 113 million. So there is a sizable gap to close over the medium term if our funding projections are correct, and we will be working closely with central government and with MHCLG to determine the impact of that as we get more clarity. So I think that's it for the kind of macro position. As I say, the main headline is that in theory, depending on the settlement this week, we ought to be able to close the gap for 21-22.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And that statement of that hopefully the gap will be closed without recourse to services is most encouraging, and probably takes away a number of the questions that I was going to raise. So that's tentatively good news, depending on what the settlement would be. So we'll open it up to comments from committee members, and Mike is first, Mike Goodman. So over to you, Mike.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for that explanation, Mark. And I must admit, it is very encouraging to hear you say that we don't have to find those efficiencies that we were all concerned about. The question I've got, though, is your last slide where you showed £170 million still looking at for the 5 years. What does that actually mean when you take into account the announcement that was made that's helped us in 2021-22? It must be less than 170 million now than it was before the government announcement.
Yes, so a lot will depend on the final makeup of the funding we get for 21-22. But in theory, if that funding materialises as we expect, if it was permanent funding, then it would reduce the 170 million by 18.3 million on the face of it. There are elements to next year's funding package which we expect to be one-off. So just for some further context, in the draft budget, we identified circa £15 million worth of pressures that were COVID-19 related. And part of the 21-22 settlement is based around the government providing further COVID-19 support for local authorities. So yes, in theory, if the £18.3 million gap was closed permanently, then it would reduce the 170 million to circa 150, but it'll depend on the permanency of that funding.
Thank you. We've got thanks, Mark, and thanks, Mike. We've got Ken first and then Fiona. So Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One small point and then a question. On the draft budget 21-22, this one of the slides, the line central income and expenditure has a 0 directorate gap against it, although that doesn't seem to be borne out by the figures that precede it in those other columns. Is it a typo? Because the overall total of 18.3 also seems to be wrong.
So 18.3 million is the gap, and that should be the sum of the directorate gaps in the final column there. The 3.2 million pressure on central income and expenditure relates primarily to increased borrowing costs, which fund the capital programme. And essentially the way we've built the budget is to assume that is an unavoidable pressure and one that reflects across all of the directorates with a capital programme. And so the gap that relates to central income and expenditure has effectively been distributed across all of the directorates.
That's right. Okay. Now the bigger question is this: over the 5 years, currently we're looking at something around £170 million gap, and yet this year, the coming year, I think it's being mooted that we should impose a council tax increase of a lesser sum than the cap that has been imposed by government. Is that a wise move, bearing in mind that overall 5-year position, or would we be better advised to raise the council tax base this year with a view to building up towards the 5-year point?
Do you want me to take that, Mark?
Yes, Rachel, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. And correct me if I get any of the technicalities wrong. So there's 2 parts to the council tax proposals, or what we're allowed to do. So one is government has said that we can increase council tax by 1.99% before we have to go to a referendum. Anything over that, we would have to go to a full county referendum. And then the other part of the spending review that we know is that we could also levy a precept for adult social care of another 3% on top of that council tax base. And you can do that over 2 years. So you could do that 3% over 21-22, but also anything that you don't use, you can carry forward into 22-23. And all of that, obviously, is for the final decision in February, listening to what select committees say preceding that. So none of that has been decided at the moment. The only thing that we have taken into account as part of our planning assumptions is a 1.99% council tax increase. So that's already built into the funding.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Rachel. So we've got Fiona, then Jonathan. So Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. When we have a look at the list of efficiencies in the budget papers we've been presented with, there are some sort of bold statements there, but not very much to actually tell us how you came to that conclusion. So I wonder if you can provide some more information on how we secure a reduction in waste prices. Why are you expecting insurance claims to reduce? And on that one particularly, I know they've reduced at the moment, but I wonder how much of that is due to the lower levels of travel because of the COVID situation. In other words, fewer cars on the road, fewer cars hitting potholes and other obstacles. And whether there are any savings that are being rolled over from 2020 to 2021.
Thank you. It may be, well, if anybody wants to answer now, and it may also be that Katie, who I see has her hand up. Yeah, we'll go slightly out of sequence. Doesn't matter about that. Katie, perhaps you'd like to give a first stab at Fiona's question.
Yeah, happy to do so. So yeah, just a couple of points that you've raised there. So waste prices, the efficiency that we've identified is actually about negotiating in year. So within the contract that we currently have with Suez, there is a particular residual waste kind of subcontract within that we have actually just renegotiated. So there's a mechanism within the contract that allows you to renegotiate if there are better market prices. So we've been working very proactively on that. So we have agreed a new price with that. It's not quite as much as we had anticipated, but we have been able to achieve some of that efficiency. So it's just a little bit about the way that actually works, or the way that the contract actually works. And that's something that we have to continue, obviously, to monitor and make sure we're getting best value from that. So that's definitely a mechanism that we can use. In terms of the insurance element, the reduction that we've actually identified in the Mtfs, the efficiency, is actually based on the current downward trend of highway defects due to less severe weather events, increased investment in highways, and more targeted activities to prevent potholes from forming in the first place. So and I know it's referred to elsewhere in the slides, but there has been obviously an increase in capital investment into the roads, and that is actually paying off in terms of we're having less issues as a result of that. So we are seeing an actual downward trend. Yes, obviously COVID will have an impact on that, but we haven't taken as much out as would otherwise come out if you were assuming COVID was the kind of long-term trend. So absolutely appreciate that we have to be very careful about that. So this is more about the kind of what we would call the more fundamental reduction in insurance claims. It is a stretch, but it's a proposal that's based on trend info, and also a decision that it's better to keep this budget as low as possible to avoid reducing further any frontline services. So again, that's been a decision that we've made. And Fiona, I'm really sorry, you mentioned one other one, so can I just ask you to repeat what the other element, sorry, that's always the case with these.
Yeah, no, that's fine. On the last line on the slide is savings to start in future years, and I was wondering if there are any savings that have been rolled forward from 2020 to 21.
Yes.
That we should take into account. And can I come back on the insurance one? You've said that we've set a stretch target. That's one of those things that it's going to be very difficult to actually control. I mean, you know, if claims come in and have to be met, then they have to be met. Mm. So I understand the reason for a stretch target, but I think we have to have a sensible target. I'm very wary of setting budgets have question marks over them, mainly because I don't think it's a good budgetary process.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. And as I say, it is very much a judgment call. I think, as I say, if we haven't taken as much as perhaps we could have done if we were being very ambitious with this. So we've tried to be reasonable in terms of the amount. I don't have the detailed analysis to hand, but I do know that there was more that we could have taken. But absolutely on that basis, we didn't take all of that. Obviously, if it does, and as you say, insurance is one of those funny things that if we have a really bad winter, if we have a really bad incident, then obviously then we would have an in-year pressure. Again, I think when we were looking at this and when we come on to the presentation about how we've kind of undertaken to come to this position and this kind of mix of efficiencies, what we've tried to be really, really careful in doing is we want to grow the service in the areas that the council wants to do. Obviously, that's required us to create some efficiencies to kind of balance that. So this was a judgment call, but it is very much, as I say, there's some reasoning behind it, at least in terms of the investment. Sorry? Nope. Are you still hearing me?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, I think it's me that went.
Okay, all right, sorry. Might have been talking to myself there, actually. So do shout up if I think my connection's okay. Just on the rolled over efficiencies point, so that's that last line, the savings to start in future years. Yes, there were a number of efficiencies that were not achieved in 2021, and to be absolutely specific, there was a particular efficiency around waste and recycling, which because of everything that happened with COVID, we weren't able to push out in the same way that we otherwise could have done. So that's 500,000 there. There was 700,000 in bus lane enforcement. in network management, and 200,000 on bus lane enforcement. So those are things that are either expected to be delivered next year, or we've actually identified alternative savings to deliver those. So we have had to think a bit quick on our feet. Obviously, the efficiencies that weren't delivered this year meant that we just had to be careful in terms of kind of balancing in year, but we've been able to do that without affecting service delivery, which I think is the important thing. And obviously going forward, we do have solutions for all of those.
Thanks.
So I hope that answers the questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan, I mean, I say we'll be flexible, but if we can keep this segment just to the macro picture, then we'll talk in more detail about ETI in a few minutes' time. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you. Just waiting to be fully unmuted. It's temptation to hit the button again and then find yourself muted again by accident. Done that many times in the last few months. Just looking at the overall picture, and thanks for presenting that. Slide 32 seems to suggest that there is a growing gap, and this is a story that's been repeated for many years recently, between what we've got and the expected level of spend. Is it possible just to explain, how you are planning to address that gap? Because one way, it might be easy to see these as not so much savings, but cuts that we need to make to our budget to make it balance. Or another is, have we got long, big contracts for things like highways and things like waste and streetlights, which are just locking in bigger and bigger amounts of money, making it harder for us to balance the books on everything else? I mean, what's our basic strategy to address that gap going forward? Is it contract management? Is it cuts/savings? What's the basic approach you're looking at?
So, Jonathan, I can come back on the corporate approach we take, and then if there's any ETI specifics, then colleagues can jump in.
Well, by all means do that. I'd rather, if we can, keep the ETI specifics to ETI when we get to that, and we can ask Jonathan's question again. But go ahead and let's see where we go.
So corporately, as we said, the intention of the medium-term financial plan and the funding estimates is to set a direction of travel for the organisation, and which is all the more important given the level of uncertainty that we expect to face over the next 5 years. And so I think it's important to establish the fact that funding is on a downward trend, because that's the context that directorates will build into their spending plans and their contractual negotiations, their contract renewals. We have, alongside the revenue budget, a significant capital programme, and a lot of that capital programme is specifically designed to release revenue efficiencies. So in other directorates, if you look at extra care or independent living, if we look at things like the SEND investment, that's all designed to help reduce the call on the revenue budget. And so the idea of that picture is to set the context for each directorate, and each year we'll look at what's necessary to close that gap. And so far the efficiencies have been sufficient. I think we'd need to review that on an annual basis, and the intention of the fair funding review is to give us a lot more certainty over the medium term period. We're in a situation at the moment where funding effectively cliff edges after each financial year, because we only get a single year settlement from government, and this year we were expecting at least a 3-year settlement, and it's been curtailed to a 1-year rollover, which is helpful because it gives us stability for next year, but it puts off some of that longer term knowledge of where funding's going. So I think corporately we'd look each year at whether efficiencies were sufficient or whether other measures were necessary. But yes, in terms of contracting and so forth, the intention of the funding forecasts is to give context to those contract discussions and those commissioning discussions.
You're on mute, Chairman.
There we go. I'm doing it like Jonathan. Yeah, Rachel, please.
Thank you. So I was just going to add to what Mark's just said as well. So alongside all of that, we're also working very hard on a transformation programme, which is taking a longer term view. I think there'll be an update to Cabinet in the new year on the transformation programme, and it's really looking at how the council will galvanise around those 4 dial-up areas that Mark showed you earlier, as well as the other 6 priorities, and looking at an outcomes-based approach. And we're hoping with that longer-term transformational approach to how our organisation looks, that we'll be able to drive further efficiencies as well. So it's looking at the funding, it's looking at what we can do as a service as well, and that's what we're trying to do across the medium term.
Thanks. Jonathan, yeah, please come back.
Thank you for that, and thank you in particular for Rachel, your added extra at the end. I think in looking at the budget and really trying to understand what the benefits of the capital spend are, including to the revenue budget going forward, it would be really useful to see what the sort of the outcome predictions or indicators are for each of the items on the capital budget. And then when we look at it in full for the final budget early next year, we can really see, well, this is being, in the capital budget because of a social benefit or an environmental benefit, or for that matter, both of those plus a financial benefit as well. And I think that clarity would be really useful going forward.
That's a good point. Maybe when we consider our own recommendations at the end of the meeting, we might just formalise that if colleagues agree. So that's great. No other colleague wishes to talk, if you like, on the macro picture. But maybe when we go into ETI questions, there'll be others as well. So Rachel and Mark, thank you very much indeed. Please stay if you'd like. But then we'll move on. So we've got plenty of time, which is great, to specifically ETI and their budget. So I don't know whether either Matt or Natalie or Katie would like to say, or indeed Rachel or anybody else would like to introduce, not for long, because we've got all the papers, or most of the papers, to set some sort of context on ETI, and then we'll leap into questions and comments thereafter. So who'd like to
Tony Osiero was going to just introduce this. I'll show a few slides again, and then obviously over to the service. So if we do that.
I hope reasonable brevity.
Yeah, we're not going to go through it line by line, don't worry.
Excellent, good. Okay. Thank you. So Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the remainder of the slides look at ETI and then Community Protection Group. So just a brief overview then. So these slides reflect the draft budget which went to Cabinet in November, and the position is currently being reviewed prior to the final budget being considered by Cabinet in January. If I just talk you through what's in those slides, but without going into detail, the first few slides provide some context to the service budget and the service strategy. The current slide that you can see is a breakdown of the current year's budget. I've also sent the committee a similar breakdown for next year's budget, and I should just apologise there that was quite late in coming. We wouldn't normally have that level of apologies for that, Chairman. We wouldn't normally have that level of detail available at this stage in the budget process. We'd normally publish that when we publish the budget book. So in doing that, I've had to make some assumptions and some apportionments, but I hope that's informative. If we can move forwards to slide 11, please, Rachel. So this is where we start to set out the detailed position for the Directorate, and the community protection slides will follow a similar format. If you look towards the middle of that table, you can see a column for 2021-22, and what that shows you is that the next financial year for ETI, we expect pressures of 9.4 million. So that includes inflation and prices, as well as impacts of COVID-19. We expect efficiencies of 3.4 million. across waste, highways and countryside, and that results in a gap next year of 6 million, which is part of the corporate gap that Mark discussed earlier. And then that gap is forecast to grow across future years. And that's based on a number of assumptions, both around increases to costs in future years, but also assumptions around likely funding in future years, and we'll be reviewing those as we go forwards. And if we move forwards, there are then some further slides that firstly show you that gap graphically, but then also list the pressures and the efficiencies in a bit more detail. And then the final slides look at the capital position for ETI. So just a reminder, the capital programme is comprised of the budget, which is for schemes that are relatively mature and ready to proceed, and then the capital pipeline, which is schemes that are at an earlier stage of development and still subject to a final business case. So the schemes in the pipeline are very much part of the council's capital programme, but the timing and the actual amounts may change as those business cases are developed. Did you want me quickly to cover CPG as well, or would you like to handle that later?
Personally, I think we could hold that.
Yeah.
CPG until we get to CPG, rather than taking it all together. If that's okay, Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Katie, over to you.
Yes, so just to add a little bit to what Tony has kind of taken you through, very briefly, I mean, as we've set out, we're showing a £6 million pressure for 21-22, and going forward, we obviously have more pressure in the budget that we will need to consider. I think critically for me, and it comes to, I think, Jonathan's point earlier, we very early on this year, we started looking at a 5-year financial strategy for ETI, bearing in mind all of the kind of growth, all of the pressure that we knew we were going to be taking on because of all of the council's new priorities around place. So whether it be climate change, countryside, infrastructure, major projects, we've got a huge new agenda at one of the most challenging times that we will see in our generation for local government. So we did start looking at a 5-year financial strategy that is underpinning. It is actually included in the slide pack. We didn't dwell on it too much, but it is very much about building sustainability into our services. So looking at where we can to recover costs, where we can make income. We are limited in some cases where we can do that, but obviously where we can, we will certainly do that and invest back into the service. It is about efficiencies, and it sounds really boring, but actually at the end of the day, we are going through a process in ETI at the moment where we're reviewing absolutely everything that we do. So really kind of thinking hard about, are we doing things in the most efficient way possible? And then, of course, underpinning all of this, innovation, but also an ability to prioritize as well. And that's the thing. We know that we're facing huge financial uncertainty going forward. So what we need to do is make sure, and it's particularly true of our capital program, where we're doing a particular prioritization methodology, which will sit alongside our capital pipeline in ETI, really trying to get very clear, and again, to Jonathan's point, about what are the benefits of what we are doing, and therefore what is the rationale for what are we doing, how do we prioritize those services going forward. Fortunately, the Mtfs proposition, which we've put to you today, which is going in with that £6 million gap, we can deliver that without compromising our services. And I know that was a key question that Select Committee asked us. Well, asked me certainly a few meetings ago. Are you going to have to compromise service delivery? And I can say, hand on heart, what we are presenting you today with that £6 million gap, we are not compromising service delivery, which is a really critical bit. The difficult bit is 22-23 onwards, and that's where we're having to drive through some of this financial strategy. But I can absolutely assure you our focus is on positive efficiencies, using our strategies where we can to reduce waste, to recycle where we can, and ultimately to bring down the cost of everything that we're doing. Yes, we have some big contracts, but they're all going out to procurement now, and where we can build innovation, where we can build better service delivery, more efficient service delivery, and we're absolutely doing that. But obviously very happy to answer any questions that the committee might have, and I don't know if Matt and Natalie wishes to add anything to that.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'm sure Matt and Natalie will come in at various points, be most unlike them not to. Can I just start off kick off by asking just on the summary of budgeted pressures, and two caught my eye, and they're quite sort of kind related. One is pay inflation, 500,000 for next year, rising to 2.8 by 21-26. The government has just announced effectively a pay freeze in the public sector. I know Surrey is possibly doing a bit on the edges. So the question for that is, is that a diminishing or less acute budget pressure because of national government? The second is the first one, price inflation. Now, national inflation, I last checked at CPI, was running at 0.8%. Contractual inflation, including waste highways, assuming a base rate of 2.5% in most cases. That's an awful lot higher than the average rate of the current rate of inflation. Now, there may be good reasons for that, but I'd be grateful if you could elaborate on both the pay element as to whether it is as serious a budget pressure as we might have feared, but even more important, whether price inflation for contract may be somewhat overstated.
Okay, so I'm happy to take that, John, and then I'll probably bring in colleagues just to do the detail. So in terms of to provide some assurance, yes, you're absolutely right. The contract inflation rate that we planned for, this draft budget, the proposals that you've seen, precedes the Chancellor's spending review. So in some respects, some of the things that you just mentioned, they are actually to be taken into account. So just to assure, we are going to be reviewing inflation rates. I know that's something that Tony's already on with as part of the final budget, and that should help further to reduce that pressure. And then on the public sector pay freeze, it's something that we are considering at CLT level. I might just ask Rachel. I don't know if there's anything that we've heard that we can share on that at the moment in respect, because obviously there is a decision for us to be taking as an organisation in respect of what we then do in light of that, and that is something that CLT is certainly looking at the moment. I don't know, Rachel, if you've been made aware of anything that we can talk further about that at this stage, if any decisions have been finally made on that.
To my knowledge, there's no further decisions at the moment, but that's the direction of travel, Katie, correct? So it'll be reflected within the final budget report.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll just have one quick, then I know Saj and Jonathan was. So, in terms of price inflation for contracts, is it reasonable, credible to suggest that in the actuality, maybe somewhat less than 2.5?
Yes, is my understanding, and certainly what we are factoring in. So Tony, I don't know if you want to say anything further, because I know that's a piece of work that you've already started with the service.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Yeah, so as part of the final budget, we're reviewing inflation rates. So as you rightly said, the assumption previously was 2.5%. We're now looking at a revised assumption of 1.5% across contracts. That does vary for some of our contracts. But in general terms, that would reduce inflation by just over £1 million next year.
Interesting. Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Katie. Saj, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Katie, it was good to hear that you said 6 million gap. You will cover that without compromising any services. Surely, if that is the case, then that shouldn't be shown as a gap. If we know where we're going to find that, then that shouldn't be, showing as a gap.
So if I can come back on that, so apologies if that was unclear. So essentially, what we're suggesting is that we need that 6 million growth in our budget. So what we've been advised corporately. So essentially, we've worked over the past several months to try to reduce our budget gap down to zero. We haven't been able to do that as yet. So what the slides that Tony presented obviously shows that we are 6 million over our current kind of budget. And what we are proposing is that if we don't have to make any further savings, we can deliver services without any compromise. If we had to continue to close that gap and reduce that 6 million down to zero, which in normal times we would be expected to absolutely close our budget gap and deliver a balanced budget going into the next year. Unfortunately, we would have to compromise service delivery. What is positive, if you think back to what Rachel was saying at the beginning and Mark said at the beginning in terms of what we think the government settlement is going to look like for local authorities, it does mean that we will be able to hold that pressure, or rather we will be able to grow the ETI budget is effectively the net impact of that. So we will be growing the ETI budget by 6 million. If we can do that, we can continue to deliver our services in the way that we would expect. If we did have to come in with a balance and reduce that down, then we would be making compromises. So I hope that's a bit clear. I'm happy to come back if that isn't for any reason.
Thanks, Katie. Saj, are you happy?
Yes, that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saj. Jonathan.
Thank you. I'm just going to start by just repeating the end of the last question, just to make 100% sure I understand it. Yeah. So we've got an 18.3 million budget gap. There's around 6 of that applies to ET&I. The current slides we're looking at for proposed dealing with efficiencies or efficiencies proposed in the next financial year and pressures we predict for the next financial year are on the basis that there will remain that gap. So we're looking at a budget as if there will still be an 18 million overall gap, but the expectation is between now and the final budget that gap will disappear. So the situation we're looking at in proposed pressures and efficiencies is what we think will be the turnout in effect.
Yes, and again, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
But yes, that's so effectively what has transpired is that obviously the developments around the local government settlement will effectively close the gap for us, is what we're saying.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just thought it was worth clarifying that going forward, because that's a very important thing to properly understand. And it's easy to misread this budget to the tune of tens of millions of pounds if you're not careful. With that in mind, and sort of building on John's question about contracts, I've got one question about the highways contract and one about the waste contract. So firstly, you've got a prediction of contract increase overall. Are we expecting that to be reflected in the letting of the new highways contract? I understand that's not until it's going to come real, perhaps not until the year after next. But, if we're looking at efficiency savings across the board, are we looking for an efficiency saving in the overall size of that contract going forward? And secondly, can't see the eco part mentioned in any of your pressures on the slide. In terms of the finance for next year. So the question I'd like to ask is, what is the risk to the sustainability of the budget, of the overall contractual situation around the eco park? For example, should it not be fully commissioned by the end of this year or at some point next year?
Okay. So if I take the highways one first, so what is interesting about the highways contract is that maintenance prices have been retendered and benchmarked through the life of the existing contract. So it's a bit like I was mentioning before in respect of the waste contract. There are certain mechanisms within contracts that you build in to allow you to continue to effectively monitor the market and take advantage of any market development. So essentially our maintenance prices have actually been kind of benchmarked during the life of that existing contract. So price savings are therefore not assumed as part of the Mtfs. So we've effectively taken into account that we have been monitoring that and controlling that over the life of the existing contract. Obviously, they will be targeted through the procurement process. So obviously, we're in that procurement process at the moment, and we are, certainly kind of exploring with the market what is to be expected, what is a reasonable price, and obviously, if there is any opportunity to take price out of that, we certainly will do. Obviously, that's against some very high expectations about what we are delivering in respect of our highways maintenance. So that is something that we certainly balance. I suppose the bigger opportunity is actually the innovation that we can build into that new contract, which could potentially reduce cost overall. So if we do things more efficiently, if we deliver more efficient, better highways maintenance, then potentially that reduces prices elsewhere in the service. And that's really what we want to do here. We don't want to be cutting it too far to the quick and then realizing that we're actually creating, by contrast, cost pressures anywhere else. I don't know. I mean, Matt, I don't know if that's an opportunity to bring you in, because I know this is something that you've been certainly personally very much ensuring that we maintain a quality of service. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say on that particular point.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Chairman, everyone. Yes, as it was mentioned earlier, we are seeing our costs going down on insurance and other bits because we are putting that investment in. And that is something that I strongly believe in. We are also seeing the fact that complaints are going down on highways as well. We're no longer number one in highways on top of the complaints list for the County Council, and that's actually showing that our investment into the network is working. We've been able to do 40% more than we have done in previous years, and that is starting to have an effect. So it's spending more now, but actually the long-term revenue savings are there. I know it's an eye-watering amount of money, but I'm afraid we do have a very busy set of highways. Thanks, Casey.
Jonathan, back. Jonathan.
The only clarification on that, and thank you very much, Matt, for your responses, is what does 40% more done than in previous years mean? You know, how much is that financially, and what is that in real terms? Because I think that's worth capturing in terms of where we're at and where we're going forward.
Okay, so we've been able to do 40% more miles of road for the increased investment compared with the previous year where we had the lower amount of capital funding.
That's very
so that equates to 300 more miles of road, just to be clear. And so to be absolutely clear, without the additional funding, 41% of roads or 300 more miles of road would have been in red or amber condition in 2025. With the additional funding, 31% of roads are in that category. So hopefully that makes it a bit clearer, Jonathan. I appreciate it's a complex set of numbers, so hopefully that.
We can provide all this, Chairman. We can provide a sort of like a quick crib sheet of these key facts for you after the meeting.
Yeah.
Great.
And I think in this regard, the level to which we spend now and save later, and understanding what that sort of long-term benefit is, and whether that leads us to an overall reduced cost or an overall increased cost. Presumably, the former would be useful.
Yeah, that's fine. We're happy to do a little bit of, as Matt has suggested, we'll do a bit of a crib sheet and just make that absolutely explicit in terms of those particular questions there, because I think those are all really valid points. On the Eco Park, just switching to that for the moment. And I know this is one that we have mentioned briefly here before, but just to again confirm, the ongoing delay in completing the Eco Park has a number of financial consequences for the council, obviously, but the council will not start to pay for the Eco Park until the facilities are completed. And obviously that is a process that we are continuing to monitor very closely. And we are using absolutely every contractual mechanism to ensure that is being done. We're not paying for something that obviously we haven't yet received. So that is some assurance. And obviously to do that, and we would not begin paying for those facilities until they have passed what's called acceptance testing. So there are some very clear criteria that those facilities have to pass in order to achieve that payment. However, obviously, as the delay continues, the risks associated with the contract are increasing. So we are very aware of that, and we need to be transparent about that. The council, however, is continuing to take appropriate action and advice in order to protect its interests in relation to the Waste PFI contract. And I know, obviously, we had the cabinet report, which went through in November. There was a Part 2 item there, so we are working with cabinet right now on a very detailed strategy as to how we manage that. And again, it comes back to protecting the council's interests in absolutely every way we can. So I know that won't provide as much assurance as if I could give you the detail of that, but because this is a contractual matter, we are very limited in terms of the detail that I can provide with that. And I know that's frustrating, but hopefully that gives you some assurance.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Just to come back on that, I understand the confidentiality of the risks associated with
waiting patiently. So, okay, Jonathan, quickly.
Just on the contract and the cost that we'll have to pay, but on the other side, I understand we still receive payments from the government, which are due to change depending on whether that plant is accepted or rejected. Now, depending on what happens, presumably that will have a budget implication, and I'm not a finance person, so I don't know whether it's the revenue budget effects or the capital budget, or whether that's covered in your sort of reserve funding mechanism. But I wondered if you could just outline how the financial risk of the different scenarios of how much money we receive as opposed to how much we pay is covered in next year's budget.
Yeah, Tony might wish to comment on some of the detail of this, but just to be clear, so DEFRA provide us credits for the capital investment in the facility. So obviously, as you would expect, they continually keep that under review, and depending at what stage we are in the process of developing those facilities, those credits change. There is also an element of credit which is beyond the facilities and actually for the service itself. So we do receive credits from DEFRA for the service. But Tony, I don't know if you want to just say anything further in respect. I don't know how much more we can say in terms of actually how that breaks down and obviously the different scenarios, how that would change.
Yeah, there is, as you say, a limited amount we can say about this, but the budget does assume a level of PFI credit or waste infrastructure grant, and if that changes to the council's detriment, then we would need to manage that, and we would look to do that through the waste sinking fund in the first instance.
Oh, John, you're on mute.
I'm trying to be a good counsellor and behave the rules and failing dismally. Thanks for that very much. Andy, you've been waiting very patiently. Over to you. And you're on mute too. I can't hear you, Andy. Andy, you have to unmute yourself. Sorry, can't do it. Oh, don't you technology? Don't you love it? Well, whilst Andy tries to unmute himself, are there any other colleagues who'd like to speak who haven't spoken yet? Because otherwise, I'll jump into the breach while Andy's trying to. Okay, yeah, Mike, you go first. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. It's a quick one, really, for Kate and Natalie. I find it really challenging to see how much extra we're going to be spending on the countryside as we take control of the countryside from a Surrey County Council point of view, and what capital money is going to go in. It's 100,000 for next year, but that's the same as what it was in the budget next year. I wondered if we've got plans yet, and whether you're able to share them, what money and what investment we're going to be making in the countryside, which I think we all agree is so important.
Katie, you unmute yourself. There you go.
Everybody else was on mute, so now I'm doing it as well. Sorry, I've got. So yeah, I think just to say, and just very briefly, I think the capital, obviously that we've allocated now, it is really just a first step. So I think just to your point, Mike, obviously the council has very big ambitions for the countryside, and what I wouldn't want you to think is that is all that's going in. I think what we have recognised is that in any kind of big step up in a service like this, it does take time to build that up. So what we are suggesting is that this is the start of that. And obviously, as I know from your experience, you'll appreciate that you build your service up, you have to build your revenue spend alongside the capital for it to be meaningful. And obviously, one of the key things that we're focusing on at the moment is really how we not only improve the actual asset, but obviously the visitor experience as well. And that's one of the things that you'll see that there is. Getting into the detail, we've actually put some growth in around the countryside, kind of the visitor experience and certainly the visitor team and the work that they're doing. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in step around that. I think what is, and we haven't really talked a massive amount about the capital program. There is a capital program here. What we are doing is actually reviewing it to make sure that we've captured absolutely everything, because we're in a slightly unusual position in ETI that we are effectively still in this gearing up stage. There is still work that's being done. The other one is obviously greener futures. So again, there's probably going to need to be a review of how we do that and some of the capital that we're putting into that. Alongside that, we're looking at more sustainable ways of funding all of this as well. So I think it is safe to say that the capital program will develop over time. That's our current position, but we would certainly look to probably grow that in kind of future years. But this is really a kind of initial step. And it is on an invest to save basis going forward. So we are obviously trying to make this as sustainable as possible. I don't know, Natalie, if you wanted to add anything to that, though.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Katie. We know there's a lot to do on the countryside estate, and actually some of the stuff that we can do, Mike, as you well know, we need to make it a better estate for our residents. And we've found that not many of our residents actually go into our countryside. It's the same people, the same, not families. We really need to make it far better for our families to go there. And actually in doing that as well, what is it that a family wants when they go to into the countryside? So we thought about that. They actually want a toilet, because if they're taking their children, that's the one thing that they will need is a toilet. So we identified the most important part of that was actually to get some toilets and get them working properly. So, you know, there is an investment there, but that will actually make more people go to the countryside, because when their little one is dying for a nappy change, they're going to have that facility there. So I'm hoping that we will increase the visitor numbers and then increase our income coming in commercially from what we are going to be able to deliver there as well. But being respectful of the areas. There are some areas that, as you've probably heard, Mike, that we had a sort of a queue of 60 people to get a cup of coffee one weekend, and 150 people on bikes turned up. So that wasn't the greatest thing, and it had to be dealt with quite robustly, shall we say. But I think we can deliver some things as well that won't cost very much money. In Reigate and Banstead, we delivered in Banstead Woods a Narnia trail. So we just used some of our old trees that had died. They were carved by somebody into Aslan, the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. It didn't cost very much money. It doesn't cost anything, but families love it. It's getting people into our countryside, helping health inequalities, helping people appreciate what we've got. And that, yeah, we can do things that are going to cost a lot of money. I think we need to look outside of the box and be innovative. Excellent. To get people there.
Thanks, Natalie. That's great. That's fantastic. Thanks, Mike. I've got quite a number of colleagues now, which is great. First of all, Andy, can you hear us in Farnham? Oh, come on, Andy. We know you're there. If not, we'll have to bypass you again. No, Andy's still having trouble. How about money we're spending on Farnham? It's billions of pounds we're spending on Farnham. We can't actually get them.
Can you hear me, John?
Fiona, whilst we still get Andy on the line, Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much. My apologies for not having forewarned you of this, but the Basingstoke Canal, I know this is a sort of partnership of a number of authorities, including Hampshire County Council and districts and boroughs on both sides of the county boundaries. I also know that in the past there has been a reluctance by some of those partners, when their budgets are under pressure, a reluctance to meet their commitment, if I can put it like that. Are you confident that that is a thing of the past, and given all the pressures that all local authorities are under at the moment, we're not going to find that some of those partners don't want to put in the full amount that they should be paying into that?
Thanks, Fiona. And Andy is back, so we'll answer Fiona's question and then we'll definitely go to Andy. Katie.
Okay, I see Natalie's put her hand up, so we'll let her speak first, if that's all right.
We all like it when Cabinet speaks, so over to you, Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. Yes, we've taken the Basingstoke Canal runs 2 years with Hampshire and 2 years with us. So I'm now chairman of that committee, and we took it back about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I am mindful that 2 of our boroughs and districts have not paid their full amount of money, which they should have done, and I will be robustly taking that up with the particular boroughs and districts, because I think we need to look at the canal and again look outside the box, look at what we can do there. I've already arranged to meet two gentlemen from the committee when lockdown and COVID allows, to see some of the things that they'd like to do. So it is something that I'm actually quite looking forward to taking this up and trying to get some other things going, because it seems to have been somewhat neglected, probably for reasons of money, and it doesn't really affect the whole of Surrey, and it affects a very small part. So I think it's a great asset, and I think we should actually look at doing more with it, Fiona. So I'm more than happy to keep you in the loop on that as we go forward.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Fiona. Andy, third time lucky.
Sorry, John, can you hear me this time, Chairman?
Perfect.
Sorry, the mute button just wasn't working on my Dell computer, so I've had to join on another laptop, and I've slightly lost track. But the question I wanted to ask Matt and Katie was about priorities, actually, that very reassured to hear that things are getting better on highways maintenance. But I remember when I was first joined as a councillor, I went to Merrow, and it was explained to me how big a backlog we had in highways across the county, and it would take years and years to recover this. And I just wonder about the priorities. If you look at the pie charts in terms of where we expend our service budget, I think the public would be surprised at what a small proportion, in a sense, that the highways maintenance budget is. That all these other things are very important, waste and strategic transport and street lighting and so on. But I just wonder if in fact the highways budget gets the priority it deserves in terms of 21 million doesn't seem an awful lot of money to maintain Surrey's roads across the whole of Surrey. So, there's tremendous pressures and the kind of competition between the different services, but are we giving the real priority to highways maintenance that the public would want us to? And that is the big issue for most of the public. So that's my question, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Come on, Matt. You know you're bursting to answer.
I'm going to let him speak first.
Go on, Matt.
Honestly, we do have to bear in mind, I mean, I would love actually that we could just say, yes, do you know what, let's fully fund the whole of ETI and highways, but it is not a statutory service, and we do need to bear that in mind. We do have education, adult social care and children. They must take the priority, particularly as we look after them, and there are some very complex needs there. So they do need to take priority. What we have done this time is we've put the investment back in. So we're not doing a managed decline, we're getting actual real investment back into our highway network. And I think hopefully you can all agree you're seeing the results now. The team have done an absolutely fantastic job in a short amount of time. And we have guaranteed this 92 million extra over 5 years. So we'll continue to see that improvement going in as we reduce the amount of sort of the red rating and more comes into the green. So I think it's going to be a bit slower. It's going to be about 5 years, maybe another 10. But looking at what you can see in the past couple of years, the fact we've done 500 miles of road repairs in the past 4 years, we're starting to see the structures being done. We're slowly getting there, but a lot's been done in the past 2 years, which is a real credit to the team. So. I'll always accept more money because I'm afraid roads is a bottomless pit of money, but we are doing well with what we've got, and the Cabinet is fully supportive of putting that extra investment in where we can.
Thank you, Matt. Have we got follow-up, Andy?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chairman. That's a good answer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. So we've got Jonathan first. Oh no, Jonathan's spoken already. We'll get, even though he put his hand up first, we'll go to guys colleagues who haven't. So Paul Deach first, and then we'll go to Jonathan. So, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, as you know, because when we spoke previously, I wanted to speak about bus services. I don't know whether this is the appropriate time to do that.
Of course, any time's the appropriate. Yeah.
Okay, but before I do, Chairman, I would like to just correct my good friend Natalie Bramall on a point she made about the Basingstoke Canal. Now, I also sit on that committee and have done ever since I've been a county councillor, and even before that as a borough councillor. And she mentioned that there were 2 authorities within Surrey that are not contributing. And while that might be the case, there is no agreement in place, certainly for the Surrey Heath Borough Council, to make payment. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that Surrey Heath Borough Council should be contributing more than what they do. They do contribute some via a grant, an annual grant, and personally I would like to see them pay more. However, there is no agreement in place, despite protestations from other members of the Joint Committee that there is an agreement. If there is an agreement, it was a verbal one, not a written one, and we all know what verbal agreements are worth. So if they want an agreement in place, I suggest they speak to Surrey Heath Borough Council and get that organised. But as far as I'm concerned, there is no agreement in place right now. So onto the buses, and thank you for that little interjection. Now, the work that's been done in terms of making the bus fleets more environmentally friendly should be applauded, and frankly cannot be done soon enough. I'm a big fan of the stuff that's been done in that regard. However, I've long held the view that in the settlement villages, such as the ones in the division I represent, that's Mtfs, Frimley Green and Deepcut, that the public transport is simply not a viable option for most people. Okay, until the cost, reliability, frequency, schedules are in tune with the nighttime economy and connectivity between communities is addressed, then we are quite frankly fantasising about getting people out of their cars and onto public transport. Residents have been expressing these views to me for years, and my own personal experience with local public transport means I cannot disagree with them. Locally, we do have some excellent bus services, such as the number 1, but that does not serve every community locally. I believe that public transport should be right up there with some of our top priorities, not just at council level, but at national level too. And until then, people will continue to use their cars for short journeys locally. So all I'm saying is, and perhaps this might be for the work programme element of this meeting, is that I would like the corporate leadership team, our esteemed cabinet member, Matt Furness, and others, to start taking public transport far more seriously so that our residents can feel they can get out of their vehicles. Frankly, I would love to hand my lease vehicle back to the lease company and be able to use public transport, but it's just not viable. And that's something that I would like everybody to start taking more seriously going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, very much. Matt is wanting to speak, and so we'll put Matt on, and then Katie. Then I may have a short interjection, and I know Jonathan's been also waiting patiently. So, Matt, you go first.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Paul. It's not often I'm described as esteemed, so I'll take that compliment. We are taking public transport extremely seriously, and the investment of the £50 million into low emission electric and hydrogen, that's only one part of it. So we have a bid into the DFT. We will fully fund it anyway, but we're waiting to hear the outcome of the bid. Is for on-demand transport. This is effectively a minibus that will come to you to pick you up and take you to the station or your location. We're going to be trialling that in Mole Valley, which is slightly more rural than your and my patches. I have a lot of villages as well. But in addition to the on-demand, we've also got that £9 million in for bus priority. Now, the easier we can make it for buses to get around, particularly you've got Frimley, that's a large challenge, and we've got some artificial intelligence cameras in now at the Frimley junction to start mapping that whole area for bus improvements and traffic improvements as well. If we can make it easier, the bus operators can then actually run their buses longer at a lower cost. They don't have to factor in putting extra buses in. They can actually use the same ones. They can run them longer, and probably they can run them to more places if we can guarantee them those timetables. And that's absolutely key. So the number 3 bus, I'll use an example. In my patch, the number 3 bus had to be withdrawn from Tongham because of traffic, effectively, all the way down from Camberley and Frimley. So it's the end of the line got cut in order to meet the timetables. Now, if we can actually pick those back up, get them those extra seconds, because we're talking about seconds, it was 4 seconds that they were missing the timetable by, which meant it had to be reduced. Then that can actually mean we can run them longer, and we put our subsidy into the evenings and the weekends. That actually will have the greatest bang for the buck. Because if we can start pushing our subsidies into evenings and weekends, we can capture the nighttime economy, we can capture those periods outside of the normal commute, which actually people will then, as you say, actually I'll use the bus rather than take the car.
Would you allow me just to come back very quickly, Chairman?
Very quickly, Paul, then I'll come in before Katie.
Thank you, Matt. That's very reassuring to hear, actually, and I wasn't aware of the AI work that's going on in Frimley. I'd be very keen to hear more about that at a later stage. Could you tell me, sure, Matt, when do you think that residents will actually start to feel the benefit of this work?
Ideally, we'll actually start seeing the benefit about April, May next year. We are pushing the bus operators, for example, for the orders. They're putting their orders in now for the new vehicles for our fund. We're already getting operators putting their expression of interests into us. And then the DRT is something, it's almost like a ready-made package that you can just buy. We just need to make sure that we want to choose a proper operating model for that. And they can all be electric as well. So it can either be done by a community group, or we can get a bus operator themselves to operate that. So it's quite exciting what we can do there. With countryside locations, they'll pick you up pretty much from your house. With slightly more urban areas, they'll probably pick you up from a junction. So if you can walk to the end of your road, effectively the minibus will come and get you from there.
Thank you very much.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, can I just interject? I do apologise, Jonathan. When it comes back to what Paul and Matt have just said, we're going to spend these 50 million quid, excellent, on the buses, notwithstanding what Matt has just said. But we know because of COVID that bus usage at the moment is very, very low. We don't know whether it will come back. The initiatives that Matt has suggested, are new ones. My question, therefore, is, as far as the budget is concerned, the budget for subsidies, there's a revenue budget for subsidies of our bus services at the moment. Is that, even though usage has dramatically declined over, let's say, because of COVID, are we still, as we move to the electric buses, are we still putting sufficient revenue into supporting the bus services? They don't disappear. So my question then is, compared to last year, in terms of the support for bus services, what will the revenue budget for supporting the subsidies effectively, for the coming year, and is it still envisaged that they will remain at whatever level there is? Because I would be apprehensive, to say the least, if the support for bus services, as we move to an environmental friendly extra buses, were to be cut. So there is a budget here. What are the answers? What is the answer in terms of the support, revenue support, in terms of subsidies for our buses from last year to this year, or for the forthcoming year?
Okay. Well, Casey, do you have the exact figure? If I remember, it's around 8 million that we've put in as revenue to the buses. One thing, John, is, and it's one the operators did thank us again for only just yesterday, was even before the government told us all to continue paying the bus operators, we'd already made that decision when COVID first hit in the pandemic. So actually, we've been very heavily supporting the bus operators. We've continued all of our payments. Yep. And in addition, we have done extra payments over and above around hospital routes. And just recently, we're also supporting the Heathrow routes as well through Spelthorne, because Heathrow have announced a massive withdrawal of their subsidies of the bus routes, particularly for the out of hours. These are the early times. So we stepped in to make sure that we maintain routes back and forth from the airport there. So we are going to continue our level of revenue. It's worth bearing in mind that for that 8 million, we only fund about a quarter of the routes. 3/4 of all routes in Surrey are commercially viable. Sure. So a lot of our money goes on as I said earlier, the evenings or the weekends to continue a service there, or particular routes, as I say, to key locations like hospitals or airports. Yeah. With the capital funding that we're doing, there is kind of a quid pro quo with all the bus operators. So whilst we're putting in that capital amount, which weirdly private companies find the capital a bit more difficult, we find that easy. It's the other way round. We're saying to them, right, your quid pro quo is either you need to run evening services, longer routes, or you maintain these routes at your cost for longer. So as well as their own investment into technology. So there will be more coming. It's just getting those enhanced partnerships in place with the bus operators. They're very excited and they're really keen to work with us, as they have said that we are a lot better to work with in a number of other areas.
I'm sure that is the case. Well done for everything you've just said, which reflects well on the county. To answer my specific question, is the 8 million budgeted for 21-22 the same, an increase or a decrease on the budget for this financial year that ends in April? Is it the same? More?
Yeah, it's just to that point, if I may, John. So we have actually built in some additional support into 21-22. So there's a specific pressure of 1.7 million, specifically picking up on the point that you've raised in terms of that concern around what COVID has done. At the moment, obviously, the government is continuing to put money into buses and continuing to support. But we are concerned, I think we've heard that there may be a reduction in that going forward. So we specifically have, and that's one of the challenging decisions we had to make, was at a time when we're, being asked to kind of balance our budget, do we actually make that budget available? But to be absolutely clear, and I know Matt as cabinet member, but also cabinet generally said, we need to make sure that we're able to step in if that government support does go. So it's not the same level. That 1.7 doesn't completely equate to what the government has been doing. But what we're expecting is that government support will continue sometime into the new year. We will then have some money to be able to put into that to continue to support as whilst that builds back up, basically.
And I'm in danger of doing that. But essentially, from members of the public who be watching, is the amount of money that the county is funding for the bus services going to remain broadly the same, or is it going to, as I think, slightly increase, or not?
We will have the ability to increase it. So it will be staying the same. But again, we've got that pressure in next year. So if there is a need to put more money into it, then we will do that.
Thank you so much. That's great. Jonathan, been very patient. Over to you.
Thank you. And I'll move on from buses. Although I would just like to point out that it looks like it's the biggest item in what I'm looking at, which is the capital budget on slide 35, and also the pipeline budget that follows it on slide 36. So a sort of a very minor question, maybe it's a follow-up after the meeting, is if it's possible to provide an extra column on slide 35 of what the spend is on those different items in this year, so we can see, which of those capital items are a significant increase or decrease compared to what we're currently spending. And in terms of the capital and pipeline overall, my question really is some kind of commentary to see, how these all or individually work towards the delivery of the council's net zero pledge on climate change. And then with regard to the pipeline items on slide 36, it's a very impressive list of projects. It looks like a lot of money for a lot of things, but it's not entirely clear what each of them are to anyone who just looks at that slide as it is now. Where are these things happening? When are they likely to happen? And what do those items actually refer to? And I don't know if it's possible just to go through that slide 36 and almost just talk us through the bullet points and explain, what those items are. And, with a later next year. Thank you.
Okay, so I can come in, if I may, on the climate change question. And I think hopefully, as I think we explained before, one of the things that we're absolutely doing at the moment is trying to embed the climate change strategy right across the council's entire kind of program of activity. So to be clear, I think there are some projects in here which are specifically obviously related to, in terms of solar PV, that kind of thing, which you would expect from a climate change strategy. But I think really to be absolutely clear, we are working with finance colleagues actually in terms of the process of decision making across all of our capital program. Now that's obviously work in progress, but it is something that we're continuing to develop so that you can start to see climate change through absolutely everything that we do, or our mitigation of climate change rather. So just to be clear though, in terms of what we've got here, the capital pipeline does include provision for accelerating the introduction of low emission buses, solar and other renewable energy installations, infrastructure to support the introduction of electric vehicles, and obviously active travel improvements, which is a big focus for our transport network going forward. We're also looking at, and it's fairly early, but again, it's part of this green finance kind of work that we're doing, and kind of green capital that we're looking at. Which is looking at setting up a low carbon energy revolving loan fund. So it's something that myself and my colleague Carolyn, who's on the call, have got experience of from Kent. Carolyn's done a lot of work on this in the past. And so we're looking at this as a potential option for really kind of stepping up our investment in that kind of low carbon energy infrastructure. That would allow us to match obviously with government funding and really kind of accelerate investment in renewables and energy efficiency measures. But I think, as I say, the bigger piece is kind of how we then embed this in terms of how we deliver schools, in terms of how we deliver our property estate, highways, etc. So we're trying to embed that across the board, but at least that commentary just gives you a little bit in terms of the specific. You've been referring to a slide, and I just want to make sure that I'm absolutely clear which one, because I've got a set of slides, and I've got it as slide 16. So is it the draft capital program 2? Is that the one that you're looking at, Jonathan? It's the one that's got Farnham improvement schemes at the top, is that right?
I think so. I think that's the one.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So yes, I suppose there is in the committee agenda. Okay, right. So basically, if I can just go to that page 35, so I will just go on to that, make sure that I've got the right. I'm actually looking at the right thing because I was looking at the slides, so apologies. So yes, in terms of what you've got there, so very happy to kind of talk through some of this. Colleagues might chip in with some of the detail, but in terms of what we've got, so the top 2 lines relate to the Surrey flood alleviation works. So there's the River Thames scheme, which is a approximately £500 million oh, sorry, is it page 36? So is it, sorry, can I be absolutely clear? Is it the table? Or is it the bullet point list? Sorry, Jonathan.
On the table, I think we've got everything up, so I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
On the table, I think it would be useful, if possible, after the meeting, just to share what the current this year is, so it's clear as to where the numbers are going up. But if it's possible to talk through the bullet point list, which I think is called Capital 2.
Sorry, okay, I am on the same page now, apologies. So yes, in terms of, I'll just talk through very briefly. So the Farnham improvement schemes, we've got an estimate there for essentially the work that we're doing in Farnham. Andy will know this very well. We're working very closely with local stakeholders, the town council, borough council, and our divisional members, as well as kind of key stakeholders within Farnham, to relook at Farnham to really try to deliver a more sustainable, a healthier kind of infrastructure for Farnham. So as we all know, Farnham is a fantastic place, but some of the road infrastructure in particular creates real issues for the functioning of the town, the functioning of the economy there, and obviously the kind of the quality of life of individuals living in Farnham. So it is very much a kind of focal point for our capital program to look at what we can do to essentially deliver better infrastructure into Farnham, to better manage some of those challenges that Farnham face in respect of the kind of local place there. The A22 strategic development, so there's some work that we're doing with Tandridge at the moment to support obviously some of the growth in their local plan. There are a number of infrastructure projects that are quite key to their local plan. And again, we're working with, particularly on some of the highways elements of that, to working very closely with them to identify where those priorities are. It's why it's in the pipeline at the moment. There's still some decisions to be made about specifically what the shape of some of those improvements will look like. But we've had to earmark some of that because it is a strategic area for us as a county in terms of where growth will be going in the future. And obviously we want to support that with the infrastructure, particularly the highways infrastructure to support that. In terms of local enterprise partnership schemes, we have put an element into the pipeline, which allows us to bid in future for the kind of local enterprise partnership schemes that we've had to date. So we actually have a very big program that we've already delivered of the Local Growth Fund, which was the local enterprise partnership schemes up until, and they finish actually in March 2021. We're expecting the Shared Prosperity Fund will be announced. There will be some detail in terms of what that will look like. Obviously, the Levelling Up Fund is the new name of that, but we still don't have the detail in terms of what that will look like. So what this is, that amount in there is basically our amount, which would basically be matched against any LEP funding in the future. So Levelling Up Fund or any other fund that the LEPs might be offering, it has been a really big part of our capital program in ETI up until now. So we've earmarked that for any potential bids that we might put into that. Low emission vehicles. So this is very much about kind of EV charging infrastructure that we might be putting in the future. We've got a strategy which is in draft at the moment, and it's looking at how we get best value for our taxpayer money on that. So where do we put the investment to enable that step change in the adoption of EV vehicles? Local cycling and walking infrastructure, which are also called LSWIPs. These are plans which we're doing with districts and boroughs. They're essentially local plans for where you would put active travel measures, and it is the way in which the DFT in the future will be investing in a kind of systematic way in active travel schemes. So that is something that is currently in development. We are working with a series of boroughs. We're doing that in sequence, but there are a few that we've already started those conversations. The materials recovery facility, again, this is part of our waste infrastructure. It is a project. Again, we can provide more detail on this, but this is essentially something that's really critical if we are to make a step change in the essentially the way in which we recycle and the proportion that we recycle effectively. Community recycling centre improvements, again, that is all part of that Rethinking Waste program, which we are doing, all of which will feed into the re-procurement that we do for to start in September 2024. But obviously, this is the specific infrastructure associated with that. And then those last two lines are a bit, they're placeholders at the moment. So we are expecting to step up our game in terms of solar renewable energy installations to support our climate change agenda. And so there are a number of schemes which we have basically flagged that we want to develop. And then there is the pipeline schemes, which I know Surrey Infrastructure Plan will be coming to the Select Committee in January. So there will be some further detail behind that. But essentially, this is really kind of identifying the fact that we still need to really establish what the priorities will be and make sure that we don't have any gaps in our capital pipeline. So with all of the ambition that the Council has placed on place, just want to make sure that we've got the sufficient. And so we will be looking at how we prioritise our capital programme. And this gives us this line here at the end just says that we probably will have new schemes that we want to introduce into the programme at a later stage. I hope that's been a real canter through. I apologise for that, but hopefully that's
it is. We must keep an eye on time because we haven't done CPG yet. Thanks, Katie, very much, and thanks, Jonathan, for that. No request for supplementary from Jonathan. I can't see any other colleagues wishing to address. So we've had a very good session. What we'll do, again, with colleagues' permission, is we'll move on. You know, we may give recommendations at the end of the session to go with the other select committees. But let's do that as in the round once we've heard from CPG. So I mean, I think we've covered the ground really well, and many thanks to colleagues and to all officers and cabinet members from ETI for being so helpful and so forthcoming with questions and good answers to the points raised by colleagues. So I now see a blank screen. So let's move on to CPG, and we'll do the same broad format as ETI. of a short introduction, and then we'll go into questions to any officers, Steve, and of course Denise. So fire away, guys.
Thank you, Chairman. Shall I just take you briefly through the slides?
That'd be great, Tony. Yeah.
So the slides follow the same format as for ETI. So the first few slides set out the services that comprise CPG, the current budget and the service strategy, and then move on to a summary of the Mtfs, the draft budget. So again, if you look at the column that's roughly in the middle of that page, that shows you the 2021-22 draft budget. So at the moment, the draft budget shows expected pressures next year of 1.8 million, offset by efficiencies of 0.5 million. So those pressures are primarily inflation, and as we've discussed, inflation will be reviewed, and also some coroner's costs within pressures, and the efficiencies are the full year impact of changes introduced this year, and that leads down to a gap next year of 1.2 million. That gap is then shown graphically, and it increases over future years, and then the following slides list out the pressures and efficiency and the capital programme.
Thanks, Tony. Do you want me to take it from here?
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So overall, I think Councillor Matthew Furness earlier spoke about highways and others being non-statutory, despite being important. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, great. I mean, unlike that, the Community Protection Group is mostly all statutory. We've got the Fire and Rescue, the Coroner's Service, Health and Safety, emergency management, etc., all of which meet statutory requirements for the County Council, like children's and adult social care do too. And so it's important that we deliver those efficiently and effectively. The Coroner's Service came to us in April this year, and we've been looking at how that's been running. So it's always historically been overspent in the Coroner's Service, and I'll go into more detail later if colleagues have questions about that. But this year we've established the costs of Coroner's Service, and I know there'll be some interest in that. But what we found is that they weren't, in essence, is a mixture of poor management, poor contract management, pathologist costs, underestimating legal costs, costs of inquests, etc. All have had to be addressed, and to re-establish the budget. And also, when we took over the service as a county council, before it came to CPG this year, it was taken over from the police with a tapering budget from them as well, which also hasn't helped with the management of the budget. So in effect, what we're doing is re-establishing the budget for the Coroner's Service now, so that we know we can deliver our statutory requirements as well in the years coming, and to be really clear about what they'll be. So some of that you will see is a pressure which remains a pressure going forward. Once we've established those baseline costs, and we do have some work underway with other partners to be more efficient and effective, like health and others as well, we will be able to work towards efficiencies, we hope, in delivering the statutory service in the future. It's important to remember, though, 40% of all the people that die in Surrey will probably pass through the Coroner's Service. And it's important that we maintain in all our elements the dignity of the dead, and for the bereaved and their loved ones, that we are able to give them the service that they require as well. And this year has been, as you will know, particularly difficult for that as well. But during the pandemic, whilst the Coroner's Service has been under extreme pressure, and it's the sort of pressure we only normally see sort of January, February in Surrey, and historically we have seen that for many years as well. Actually, we've been able to undertake this transformation, and we're in the middle of that, and it will continue until we've established, and as it says in the capital costs, a new body storage and court facility as well. So that's all being undertaken now, but the revenue side is about establishing the new costs of the coroners. The other pieces of revenue pressures are not so much a worry to me personally, because I think we'll find them in efficiencies and effectiveness going forward. The other piece to remember is the Fire and Rescue Service has been undergoing its transformation and making the efficiencies and being effective, and that will finish in January. So the phase 2 of the efficiencies and effectiveness will be completed in January. And then at that stage, we'll look at, once we know what the settlement is, local government settlement is as well, and our colleagues from finance have been able to look at some of those other cost pressures that we've seen in that extending gap through to 25-26, looks at the gap between where we are and what we're not.
Exiting.
Okay, so I don't know who that was. But I think what we're looking at is looking at that gap insofar as future settlements, council tax and future efficiencies as well, and bearing in mind the requirement to deliver statutory services and report on their efficiency and effectiveness, not just to HMI, but also to the Ministry of Justice and others as well, and of course the County Council. So that's a brief summary, obviously a lot more detail. Denise, did you want to say anything at this stage, or?
Denise, yeah. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to say that historically, the services within the Community Protection Group, which was only formed a year ago, have been very disciplined and have always come in on budget. And obviously, I certainly worked with Anne Charlton, who was previously a monitoring officer at Surrey, when the coroner's service transitioned from Surrey Police, with quite a poor settlement, actually, in terms of the tapered funding over a 5-year period. So there's a history of underfunding, and as you can see from the slides, that the pressures that are being applied to the Community Protection Group at the moment are coming in from the coroner's service. And I have to say, we had a presentation from the coroner and from Steve and from the officer responsible, Sarah Kershaw, to Cabinet, a very encouraging presentation around the improvement in relationships, the restructuring that's underway, the improvement on the culture within the coroner service to address these historic issues, and also the potential for investment in new technology, scanners that are undertaking post-mortems. There's been an uplift in the payments to pathologists, and through the local resilience forum as well, obviously through COVID, some of those partnership arrangements have really strengthened and enabled us to look at further efficiencies downstream, obviously, once the transformation's underway. As Steve touched on as well, obviously the transformation of the fire service is, I would say, it's almost complete in terms of the phasing, and there are some say quite small efficiencies actually, given the investment in the fire service, which is really an important point to make, because the whole point of this transformation was really to manage risk in the best possible way to optimise Surrey Fire and Rescue Service, and that investment into the prevention and protection, business safety, the education support, that's all safe and well visits, that's all being able to be rolled out even through a pandemic, has all kind of been completely on track, has met the expectations of all of our external validation critiques. We've just had our final sign-off from the National Fire Chiefs Council Advisory Panel, so we're very comfortable with the transition for Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. The context is really important in terms of the focus on the coroner's service in order to look at our budgets going forward. But again, finance have given assurance that they recognise the pressures within the coroner's service, and there have been adjustments made appropriately. So, and just trading standards. Trading standards always had an income generation target around checker trade, a sort of a business support service that sort of was wound up, and that pressure kind of exists. But there's I think it's Traders for You, so there's a new relationship that's been established. So I think the Community Protection Group are very good at identifying opportunities, but I don't think there should be a relentless pressure on the group to generate income. We've got significant investment in our training facilities, again coming downstream, and again there's opportunities for other fire and rescue services nationally to use those facilities, and that's a very realistic opportunity, albeit sort of 2-3 years down the line. There's a national shortage of high-rise 8-storey training facilities post-Grenfell. I think some home counties services go all the way as far as Scotland to use training facilities. So there's a very real prospect of us being able to produce a very effective and accessible, strategically and logistically training facility in Surrey for the South East. So I'm very comfortable about where we are. I'm very realistic around the current situation of the coroners, but I think the coroner's service is in very good hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, Steve. I'll start, looks in reasonable shape. The coroner's service, which was not in very good shape, quite serious issues, and when Steve in his previous, we've talked about the fire service in a previous meeting, was quite direct, and I was similarly direct about the failings or inadequacies of the coroner's service prior to our taking it over. So we look for progress on that over the year ahead. My question, I suppose, and it's really for information. In the capital programme, we've got two Surrey Fire. We've got for the next 3 years over 4 million to be spent on new fire engines and equipment. Be interesting to learn what those are. Are they new fire engines themselves? Are they, I don't know, do they fit within our environmental aspirations for fires? And also, although it's a very small sum, we've got capital money as opposed to revenue money for making Surrey safer of 300,000, 500,000, 500,000. So again, I would be interested in if Steve or Denise could slightly elaborate into the detail of what that money is going to be used for. So basically, new fire engines and equipment, what are they, etc., and ditto for the overall making Surrey safer.
Okay, I think I've got my mic back on, hopefully.
Fire away.
Sure. So insofar as vehicles and equipment is concerned, that is very much a case of new fire engines. So we have a replacement programme for all our equipment. So some of them will be new fire engines, which you will have seen already. Some of them have already been replaced. And there's a continuing programme so that we don't have a fleet which we sort of change all over at once, costing millions, and therefore having a big programme. So we have a rolling programme of that. And that capital expenditure programme of all equipment, which is protective clothing, different types of vehicles, hoses, you name it, spanners, everything, boats, new boats eventually, of course, for the Thames we need and for other places. All of that equipment is on a 10-year programme, which we've signed. We've been working with colleagues on to see if it's sustainable. We revisit that every few months, every quarter, and then every 6 months it's revisited as well. Insofar as efficiencies and effectiveness, environmental impact, we're very keen on that. And as you know, 18 months ago, a year ago or so, we had the first, maybe 2 years now actually, we had the first electric fire engine in the world was demonstrated here in Surrey, and we were the only English fire and rescue service to get that here. And that's because we have a partnership with a company called Rosenbauer, who provide our current fire engines, and they've developed that at the moment. The costs, sadly, at the moment are a bit prohibitive. They probably cost 3 times the amount of a fire engine at the moment, but we hope to see those costs come down. In the meantime, we're taking all the efficiencies that come along with the new vehicles as they arrive from Scania. On the other hand, we've got other vehicles like cars, and all new cars are either hybrid. We have an small electric fleet, but there are difficulties with getting all the charging points everywhere, and also with with charging them where we need to. So all of our new cars are now hybrids, which meet the efficiency targets at the moment, and it's a matter of phasing the old vehicles out and bringing the new ones in, other than for fire engines or the HGVs, where that remains a challenge at the moment about how we will be more effective on that. Denise, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, following the Chobham incident, there's always learning from those incidents, and I think the union morgues are up for review, so they're the the water carriers, and there's also some four-wheel drive vehicles to get the supplies through to the crews. So there's quite a lot of there's quite an agile response to major incidents, and there's always a review on infrastructure and equipment needed as a result of that. So just giving assurance on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And on the second piece was about capital investment, and that's for equipment for community resilience in protection prevention for our prevention and protection teams going forward. As you know, the transformation we're undertaking is to move from doing response only into doing more protection and prevention as a result of HMI's inspection 2 years ago. And our commitment under the Making Surrey Safer plan to do that. So those are things like making sure we've got the right types of detectors available over the number of periods going forward, and a vast array of different prevention and protection equipment, which actually I'm quite happy to provide some detailed information to the committee if they want. We can send that on to colleagues and councillors as well.
That'd be helpful. That'd be helpful.
We'll take that action away.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. We've now got... thanks, Steve. Saj first, and then Fiona, and then Jonathan did have his hand up, but I can't see it there. But we'll start off with Saj. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. One is like a comment, actually, Steve, on the coroner's office. Can I just say how transformed it is since you acquired that? Because I'm someone who deals with the coroner quite regularly, coming from a phase where we need an instant decision. It used to be a lengthy process, a time-wasting process, both staff-wise at the coroner's office and also on the briefs part. But since it's been acquired, it's really transformed itself. Long may it continue. Can I just make a suggestion that one of the things that we are asking for is innovation scanning. Currently, it's only available in Oxford or in Warwick. And that could be it comes at a cost, but you can actually charge that cost to the Breeze family, and people will pay to get their decision on there. Looking at that, we've got a very minor spent on the health and safety, considering that we came under fire on the staff, firemen's not getting enough rest and enough refreshments while they're on long hour shifts. Is that sufficient? I mean, shouldn't that be increased?
So if I can. Saj, thank you. If I may take those questions. So specifically, I know it wasn't a question, but on the coroners, I think it's. Thank you for your comments, and we're not absolutely satisfied that we've got where we need to, and we're nowhere improving, but we intend to improve the service, and there'll be a restructure that is coming in place in January and beyond, with some new management which we put in place. And it's been very difficult to do this, as you can imagine, and so we've had to deal with some tricky cultures and some ways of working. Insofar as non-invasive pathology, what we've done is we've been speaking to our health colleagues, and we spoke to all of the CCJs and speak to also with the coroner's service about actually that's quite a significant investment, and so but the benefits to the faith communities and to medicine actually are huge, and it also then leads into us being able to be more effective in looking at preventable deaths by understanding the causes of them as well, and then doing something about them, but all of which has been missing up until now. And so and we talked about that in select committee as well. However, that does come at a cost, but we are currently have a plan going along with our investment programme, pretty similar to what Matthew was saying earlier about his area, is that we do have capital available. And by the commitment that we've got from the County Council already to have capital investment into a new body storage facility and coroner's court, then we may be able to invest in the infrastructure that allows us to have some of that technology in place. And Health have given a commitment from their own perspective that they would like to have that in place as well. And so although it may be more expensive, we actually are looking to share those costs in the new business case going forward, which is wrapped up in the capital investment that has already been agreed in principle by the County Council. So we are really, really hopeful that that's where we're going to go, and Health are really, really leaning into that as well. sorry, there was another one there about health and safety. So health, safety and welfare, we've already invested in that and done a lot of lessons learned from Thursley and Chobham Common. And for example, we've got new vehicles, which are little cross-country vehicles, little John Deeres and quad bikes, which we've got second-hand. And we're just putting those back on the run. And so next year they'll be available to deliver. You remember we talked about the last mile, always been the difficult bit. We've got centralised food, we've got it all there, and it's getting out to all those places out on the commons. So that's investment's being done, and they'll be ready for next year as well.
Thank you very much indeed. We now got 3 colleagues, so we'll go through and perhaps we can answer crisply and curtly. That would be great.
I'll do my best, sir.
Yeah, you do very well indeed. Fiona first, and then Ken, and then Keith. So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Talking about the new fire engines and equipment, I'm aware that in some parts of the county there are some quite high-rise developments by Surrey standards, and it's possible that there may be more as there's more pressure across the county to provide housing. Are you satisfied that you've got the equipment that you need if there should be an incident in one of those high-rise buildings? I hope there won't be, but, you know, your service is all about the things that we all hope won't happen. Or is it part of the new purchasing programme to make sure that you do have the equipment you need if something goes wrong?
I'll answer that. So we do have all the equipment we need at the moment. As you know, Surrey Fire and Rescue Service has the longest reach aerial ladder platforms available in the country at the moment, and they were actually used at Grenfell Tower itself because London didn't have them, and we actually extinguished the fire on the Friday at Grenfell Tower using the last fire, using our aerial ladder platforms. But it's beyond that. This is about making sure on the prevention and protection that we engage with the builders and designers and managers of those buildings to make sure that actually they're managed in the way in which brings the risk down, so that we don't get those incidents happen in the first place, and also when they're being built that they have the right type of, for example, cladding, etc. on them as well. So that's why the 3-pronged attack that we have at the moment is the way in which we're going to deal with it. I hope that it briefly answers the question.
Very good. Are you happy, Fiona?
Yes. Like you, I'd much rather do prevention than cure, but if anything disastrous did go wrong, I'd like to know the cure is available as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Steve. Ken, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's about the coroner service again, I'm afraid. I don't want to get too heavy on this because I know that it's all being remodelled and relooked at. But one picks up the flavour from the papers that when we took it over from the police, we were not dealt with entirely frankly. I think that somewhere in the papers that indicates that, you know, we were not given the full picture. Second series of small questions. It'd be quite interesting to see a copy of the latest accounts, if that could be made available after the meeting. And small questions. Does the Ministry of Justice provide any subsidy for this, or is it entirely down to us? I see the police contributions reducing in the pressures and efficiencies table. Do they continue to provide any contribution? And finally, I think the service is occupying the old working magistrates court, which belongs to us. Is there any provision in the accounts for rent for that occupation, or is it just simply something we provide and which reduces the cost of the service? Sorry, a lot of small questions and one big one.
Thanks, Ken, very much.
Sure. So, Ministry of Justice doesn't provide anything except for the appointment of the coroners as well, and the legal framework to which they must work. So it's a bit of a poison chalice in a way, and as you know, it was handed to us from the police, and as you've intimated, in not as good shape as it should have done. I think that's all water under the bridge insofar as what happened with the police. We now have to get it in a good shape, I think, and there's not much more we can do about that. Ministry of Justice doesn't provide any other funding. It provides the legal framework for us to work around, and we have a duty to provide the court and the service that supports the judge, which is the coroner, and his deputy coroners as well, and pay for them as well. I think I might have missed a question there, not sure.
Ken, are you happy?
Oh yes. Do the police still provide any contribution, or are they out of it now?
No, it's a tapered one, so they are, but it's tapering off to zero. So at the moment, that's where we are. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the sort of financial situation about Woking Court, the premises they occupy? Is that written into the accounts as a rental, or do we just provide it and forget about it?
No, it's a Surrey County Council building.
Yeah, I realise that. That's the point. Is there a right back of a rent from the service accounts to Surrey, or is it just written off as a income earning asset?
No, it's provided and maintained by our land and property colleagues. So they just it is like any of the other buildings that we maintain in the county council, and Ministry of Justice don't pay for it at all.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken, very much. Keith.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Good morning, Steve.
Hi, Keith.
I just wanted to ask you, in the last couple of years or so, could you send us some details of the new fire... Apologies, my dog is barking at somebody at the front door.
We're all barking here, you know.
Yes. Could you please provide us, maybe offline, with some details of the new fire and rescue vehicles that the service has obtained? You mentioned some a few minutes ago, because I recall I think it was January 2018, so just a couple of years ago, not even that, a number of members, including myself, visited the Surrey Fire and Rescue headquarters in Reigate, met yourself and other colleagues, and we were shown one particular vehicle that was a new prototype, effectively, full to the brim with kit for all manner of emergencies, but smaller than the traditional large fire appliance. So I wondered how that had progressed, because it was going to be taken round the crews and the stations to get feedback on, what should be actually in it. Did that come to fruition? What happened about it? Because we haven't heard. So a list of the new investment and the equipment that you're getting would actually be helpful, and what is now in service that wasn't a couple of years ago.
Thank you very much, Keith. We'd be delighted to do that. We had planned, hopefully, but COVID got in the way, to have one of those away days where we'd actually be able to show councillors and colleagues the equipment, what we're doing, and describe our plans as well. Unfortunately, COVID has got in the way. We will do that next year, but in the meantime, I'll get a briefing to you with the pictures and the slides and the description, one of the whole of our equipment strategy insofar particularly as vehicles, because we have a vehicle and equipment strategy, and also then perhaps a PowerPoint to show you some of the vehicles and what they do, if that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. And also, there was a visit from a prototype fire appliance that was fully electric near the same time, that was brought to Surrey for us to see. And so again, how that project has developed or not.
Yeah, that's the one I mentioned earlier. So yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, absolutely.
You.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Keith.
Apologies for the dog.
No. She or he is welcome to join the discussion.
We have dogs in the fire service too.
We'll co-opt her or him as a member, a country member. Just finally from me, because no other colleagues have raised their hands yet. Just too quickly. First, I don't think you mentioned it. I do apologise. It's a long meeting and I'm a bit bedraggled. But looking on the revenue budget for efficiencies, we've got $500,000 for 2000 for next year, but 0,000, which is interesting. Even though there are reductions to find of some substantial number in the budget, so perhaps a little elaboration as to why no further efficiencies are planned or required. And that, I'm not criticising that at all. It may be a good thing. And the final one, which I think is more of a technical issue, which is how have the extra pension costs on the Surrey Fire and Rescue Services been met? I don't think it's necessarily part of the budget, but I think it's an element that that colleagues have been interested in the past. So if there's anything you can say on that, but yeah. The efficiencies one is one that I think might be worth spending a minute or so on. Either Denise or Denise has got a hand up, so we'll always take the portfolio holder first. If you want to speak, Denise, and then we'll come back.
Thanks, Chair. I was actually going to come back on some of the other points, but just in terms of the efficiencies going forward, as we've outlined today, obviously the phasing still isn't complete of the implementation of the transformation of the Making Surrey Safer plan, and everything is validated and assessed prior to moving into another sort of approach that's taken in terms of meeting the risk and the demand in Surrey. So I would say that based on the very high level assumptions that you've been presented with today in terms of the financial environment that we're looking at over the next 5 years, there'll be a series of workshops looking at reviewing, as Katie's explained, all of our contracts, commissioning. I mean, we've obviously got opportunities for generating income. We'll be looking at every activity that we undertake and the priorities and the statutory responsibilities that we have. So that's all very much in train at the moment, but it's something that we have a very close working relationship with the finance department, and that will be undertaken going forward. Just in terms, I just wanted to go back on that on the point raised by Fiona about the high rise concerns about high rise. I mean, obviously we currently do have a training facility which is active, which is Ray Park in Reigate, and we are able to even in advance of having a permanent an uplifted training provision there, we can employ modular training facilities, so we can adapt our training facilities to suit the requirements that and the obligations that we currently have. So there's a series, even subterranean options. We've had a series of presentations from Land and Property over some quite sophisticated technology that can be employed to meet those requirements. And just in terms of Ken's question around the coroners and the settlement, so we had a different chief executive, we had a different director at the time. They were actually satisfied that the settlement that was reached with Surrey Police was satisfactory, and it was a national kind of programme to move those responsibilities away from the police services. But that assurance was taken at the time. As I say, we had a previous monitoring officer responsible, but we are where we are, and as I've stated, the coroner's services has now had a root and branch review of everything that it does, and going forward it will be run on a far more efficient and effective basis. And just in terms of the IRVs, and obviously future plans with regard to response vehicles are subject to operational requirements and decisions from the service. But if you recall, our previous efficiencies prior to the Making Surrey Safer plan being drawn up was based on station closures and the implementation of IRVs at a time when national fire brigade union resistance was extremely high. We were way ahead of other services in terms of considering rolling out that approach, which was not necessarily supported nationally in terms of the confidence of the national sector being behind it. So that's kind of an explanation as to why there was so much exposure on those vehicles at that time, and then it sort of went relatively quiet. There was a pilot which I think is still ongoing. I think some of those appliances are still being supported sometimes by other appliances, but they couldn't be used operationally without having a standard appliance in support. So it was actually quite an inefficient way of testing a piece of equipment that was actually not, as I say, nationally supported. Thank you.
No, thanks, Denise, very much for that additional clarity. Anything? Anything? Yes.
Yeah, I think Denise has captured the costs, the efficiencies there. Obviously, we will be reviewing them, but we have a statutory requirement to meet the requirements of the HMI insofar as improvement, and as you know, that's the lion's shares of the budget. And we've already talked about improvements in the coroners. Once we are there, and we will know where we are at the first quarter next year, because HMI will have been back. They've already been back insofar as a COVID inspection, and we will hopefully have moved from worst fire and rescue service in England to something better. And until we do,
roll if we don't.
until we do, I think it would be a bit presumptuous to decide that there are any savings and efficiencies to be had until we know what their view is.
Sure.
But obviously, we do have an eye on that. And as we've said, insofar as pensions, there was a historic ruling, court ruling, that brought into scope for pensions part-time firefighters. And this was about a couple of years ago. And at that time, Surrey set up a scheme, a capital scheme, which looked at really basically the worst case scenario of costs and the worst case scenario of the numbers of people that we would affect would be affected. That is being worked through at the moment. There are a number of claims that are going through, and we have improved. And that was due to, again, sadly, inefficiencies in our running of the pension service at that time for the fire service pension scheme. Again, that has been vastly improved, and we have made great improvements insofar as putting aside capital costs, which sit centrally and not within the fire service budget, as you said, in order to make sure that we are able to meet those costs as well. And at the moment, that is on course and running as expected. So hopefully we'll get to the end of that within the next year, and that will no longer be a legacy. And then those uplifts in pension are a matter of national negotiation, as you know. So we're uplifts in pension and in pay, or freezes indeed, can affect the budget one way or the other.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve and Denise, very much for answering our questions and an excellent presentation. So, colleagues, we are now in deliberation phase where we had two very long and very detailed reviews. So I don't know, I mean, Ross has been sending me little emails, but it might be helpful as we go to the recommendations that we might make to Cabinet via the select committee process. If Ross, who's been no doubt taking copious notes, might help us by at least bringing together some of the strands. In fact, he has done so. Excellent. So let's have a quick look at those and open up to everyone to see whether they are happy or got any other additional recommendations that we would like to make. So let's have 20 seconds or so just to read what's on the screen and then take things from there. That seems to cover most of what we want. Now, who we got? Jonathan, yeah, over to you.
Looks good to me. I was just going to suggest the word revenue before benefits in the second action.
Sounds sensible to me. Nice. Don't see any objections from other colleagues, so let's put that in. We've got, who else have we got? Ross,
sorry,
yeah.
Just on that, I'll include revenue benefits, but I think the cabinet member was also talking about sort of satisfaction and customer complaints and things like that. So I might just expand it to include that, not just revenue, but also the sort of benefits elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Whoever DS is, thank you very much. I think it's Denise, so thank you. Yeah, sorry, Ross. Yeah. Paul Deach has put his thumb up, which is all good news. So I'll take as read presumptuously that everyone's content with those recommendations and are content with them as is without further additions. But now is your final chance to jump in and say, no, I'm not happy, or I'd like to add something. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So no. So take that as the committee agrees the recommendations. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's great.
Agreed.
Thank you. So that concludes the budget item. But before we all go to a splendid lunch, virtually. Just got to look at the recommendations and forward and tracker work. As has been said in the meeting already, we are next, the big one for next, our meeting in January, there's a Surrey infrastructure plan and director performance report that Katie alluded to, and that should be quite an important one for January. And then in March, climate change delivery plan and the Surrey fire and rescue service improvement update. So that takes us to the end of the municipal year, but this is an opportunity just in case, I see Mike's got his hand up, we need to include anything else. So over to you, Mike, and then Paul. So Mike first, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, John. Look, the use of land and the ecological challenges we face is a direct result of climate change. In April, we agreed that a land use strategy would be developed. I don't see that anywhere in the plan before us today, and I would have thought we'd at least had some input into what that's now looking like, because I know how important the service play in getting the land use right, because land use is just an element of climate change.
Thanks, Mike. I think Katie has jumped in, I assume, to answer that robustly. No, not
so, I think to be fair, I think it's a really good suggestion, Mike. I think what we'll do is offline we'll take a look at what the timing of that might be, because there's that, and there's also the local transport plan, which links into the Surrey infrastructure plan, which again it makes sense that we cite this committee on it. So if I can work with Ross on that, and probably local transport plan, John, if you think as well. I think those are two pieces that I've just looked at it now, and I just think you're probably right. Those are missing.
Okay, Mike, with that.
Yeah, just to add, John, I think the reason I say it's important is that many people will not be here after May of next year, and they've got a lot of experience. I would suggest that perhaps we could help the service with some of the key things. It's really is a help that I'm looking at this, Kate.
That sounds good to me, and Katie seems obliged with that, so that's fantastic. One customer satisfied. Over to DG, come on. Sorry, Heath, over to you, mate.
Thank you, John. Katie may have just answered it with the local transport plan, but earlier from my question to Matt Furniss about public transport, in particular buses, and very exciting news on the on-demand services that are being worked on. But perhaps later on in the work programme, I realise we're going into a new municipal year, but perhaps towards the end of next year, we could look at, because by then, hopefully, we'll have something to actually look at. And I would really love to hear more about that then, if that's okay.
Very good point. Yeah, let's make sure, assuming all of us are back. Remember, you could never make assumptions about elections. That's my view.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jonathan, you had your hand up, but are you still there? And the floor is yours if you'd like to have a word.
No further comment, Chair, and happy Christmas.
Well, there we go. I think on that note, happy Christmas to all committee members and a really good 2021.
Yes, happy Christmas, everybody.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
That's superb. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very good meeting. I think construct a lot, and we're well before 12:30. So you take care, all.
Thank you.
Bye.
And you take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.